Well, greetings. Welcome to you. I'm so glad you're here. How was your week? I'm sure there were some challenges. I had them myself. But of course, here on Boomer Time, we tackle a lot of those same types of challenges, all with the hope of throwing you a lifeline, really, both in encouragement and information. This is a podcast where we explore critical issues related to aging, elder law, caregiving, and estate planning. So many of us are on that journey these days, even me. It's called the silver tsunami or the graying of America. An estimated 53 million adults in the U.S., that's hard to believe, are currently in some role as an unpaid caregiver of a parent or loved one. We've talked about that before. These numbers are only expected to rise as baby boomers age. In fact, in the next 10 years, there are going to be more people over age 65 in America than any other group. That's why more than ever, you need to be prepared by having a specific, enforceable, comprehensive, personalized estate plan in place. All of those things are so important. For many baby boomers, the idea of needing assistance as we age can feel, quite frankly, overwhelming. And the possibility of a conservatorship can sometimes seem like an inevitable reality for caregivers. Last episode, we talked about conservatorships, tackling what they are, their purpose, and some of the challenges that they present, and how to avoid one, right? If you missed that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen because there was a lot of good information in there. In this episode, we're going to continue that same discussion of conservatorships. But here we're going to talk about an issue that's not always in the forefront. And that is the issue of when it comes to rights and freedoms that ultimately can be taken away as part of a conservatorship. So this episode will be exploring how a conservatorship works, the rights it can strip away, and the consequences this can have on, quite frankly, an individual's autonomy, dignity, and emotional well-being. So I'm your host, Nancy Cogar. I'm an estate planning attorney, elder law attorney here in Tennessee, and I am just happy that you're here today for this second part of this important conversation on conservatorships. If you're a caregiver, adult child, or even a baby boomer yourself, I hope you'll stay with me as we dive into this issue. The more we understand, the better we can plan, right? And protect ourselves or our loved ones. So I'll be right back. I just wanted to kind of recap the first part of this discussion of conservatorships, because if you didn't watch that, please go back and watch that. We talked about what a conservatorship is, how it works, and how things can go wrong. Really, the most public example of that recently has been, of course, Britney Spears, the pop singer, and her struggle when her father had a conservatorship over her for years. And actually, due to some really visible public outcry and her challenging that in court, that conservatorship was ended and she got her autonomy back. So, this is really important information that we're sharing here. And not to mention also Wendy Williams, the talk show host. She was all over the place until she had an incident that took her off the air. And now she's in the middle of a conservatorship battle. And it's really unclear, based on the public debate, whether she needs it or not. So these are important issues, and I wanted to start today by understanding again what a conservatorship is, because of the rights involved. That's what we're focusing on today. In Tennessee, a conservatorship is a legal process where a court appoints someone named a conservator to take control of certain aspects of a person's life. That person would be known as the ward. A conservatorship could be responsible for managing the ward's finances, health care, and all their personal decisions. This is typically necessary when someone can no longer make decisions on their own due to, illness, incapacity, or disability. While these conservatorships are designed to protect the ward, there is a crucial point to be aware of: the rights that are lost in the process. They're just part of the process. So the ward essentially loses the ability to make decisions about their personal care, living arrangements, and financial affairs. So if you're a competent adult, sometimes I talk about this with my clients because they don't like the decisions that other people make. Well, oftentimes I'll say, if you're a competent adult, you have the right to make bad decisions. It's unfortunate, but that's part of your right, good or bad. So it's when you become incapacitated and you're endangering yourself otherwise, that you either need somebody to come step in with some estate planning that you've done previously, or your loved ones may seek the help from a court with a conservatorship like we're talking about. And this loss of control can have serious consequences. I'm going to look at that a little bit closer in just a minute, but first I wanted to talk about, again, your right to make personal decisions. That's central to an individual's autonomy. You are a person with rights. You have rights to make decisions about yourself, right? That's a part of a freedom that you have. And this includes decisions about where you live, who provides your care or doesn't provide your care, right? Who you want to interact with, who you don't want to interact with, bills you want to pay, investments you want to make or don't want to make. So, for example, an appointed conservator may decide whether the ward, the person subject to the conservatorship, stays in their home or moves to a nursing home. Losing this ability to control your circumstances can really feel like a loss of independence. Well, it is a loss of independence, right? And dignity, which is very difficult reality for someone who's been self-sufficient for most of their life. We see that even with estate planning. These are difficult decisions to make. But if you do plan that way, which of course I always recommend, you need to put people that you trust to make these decisions in place and a document that's enforceable. So that way, if the circumstance arises that you need someone to step in, you'll have those documents and that authority ready. So I also wanted to talk about the right to manage your money, right? So, you can pull money out of your bank, spend it however you want. I've had people spend money on things that cost them a lot, both, immediately and down the road. When a conservatorship is put in place, the ward typically loses control over those financial decisions. That's because if the court awards the conservator the authority to manage those finances, they will then be responsible for managing those bank accounts, paying bills, and making other financial decisions from there forward. So for many, especially baby boomers who have worked hard to secure their finances, this can really feel like an invasion of privacy and personal space. And a lot of times, even if the conservatorship is warranted, this can cause a dispute, and it can be very difficult between family members. There are also constitutional rights that can be withheld in a conservatorship, and these are just really basic, and you may not even realize this. Your right to vote. That's something that you may not have if there's a conservatorship over you. Your right to generally decide where you want to be or where you want to go, when, right? A fundamental right or liberty that can be taken away as part of a conservatorship is also the right of medical decision making. And I've talked about this before, as you have a fundamental or constitutional right to make decisions about your health care, and really more specifically, whether you want or you want to articulate that you refuse treatment, That is a constitutional right, which is fundamental. And in some conservatorships, the conservator is often given the power to make those medical decisions on behalf of the ward. And that can range from day to day care to major treatment, to end of life decisions. This means that the ward's ability to make their own healthcare choices, a right that is particularly sensitive for those people that spent their lives actively involved in their healthcare decisions, may be taken away. And like I said, most times, if it's warranted, it's because they're not able to make these decisions and there's nothing else in place that gives a trusted loved one or other the authority to assist with these decisions. So you may be thinking, what's the consequences of losing these rights? Well, I think it's kind of obvious, but there are many. And, it can go beyond the practical implications of not being able to manage your own life, right? So first of all, this occurs, like I said before, because there's been a determination that the ward, the person in the conservatorship, cannot make decisions and needs the protection of that court-appointed person. And there are bound to be consequences whether the ward is truly disabled or not, because a conservatorship deals with taking these rights away. And we've talked about that. You may not be able to vote, may not be able to drive, etc. So, and not to mention your right to direct your care, manage your money. So, what might be the consequences of a conservatorship? These are things I want you to look out for, because even if you're a loved one that's facing the hard decision of filing a petition to try to get a conservatorship over a loved one, these are things that you might have to deal with as part of that process or after the court grants you that relief. There are emotional and psychological impacts. And it just makes sense, right? Losing control over your own life can have a profound emotional impact. The loss of decision-making can lead to feelings of helplessness, frustration, depression. You may see these things in the ward, your loved one, whoever this person is. They may feel alienated or disconnected from their own lives. And that's just because when you spent years and years, right? If you're 70 years old, you've spent 70 years making your own decisions. And then suddenly you have them taken away. And it's hard not to feel like you've lost a part of your identity, right? So be on the lookout for that. Another issue kind of related to that is social isolation. So a conservatorship can lead to that isolation, because the conservator can often have control, of course, I've talked about this, over the ward, who interacts with relationships with friends, family members, and so forth. And those relationships can become strained. Sometimes it doesn't take much for family relationships to be strained, right? So add a change to the mix and you may have a new problem or something you didn't anticipate. So if the conservator feels that certain relationships aren't in the ward's best interest, they may limit that contact, and that's what they're supposed to do. This can cause emotional distress, loneliness, for the ward, especially if they're unable to see people they cared about. I've seen circumstances where neighbors have been actively involved in and out of someone's house who had dementia. And really, the conservator needed to keep them away because they were not helpful in the process. But it caused emotional distress for the ward because she was used to having those people around. And she was moved somewhere else, and that just added to it. But it was necessary. Just be aware of these things. And of course, there's also the issue of abuse of that power. So I'd like to think that this doesn't happen as often as we hear in the news, but I just think it's something that's important to talk about. So while these conservatorships are intended to protect individuals, they can leave people vulnerable to abuse. So I've talked about these. There's been instances where conservators can exploit their position, for personal gain, just mismanaging finances or just completely neglecting the needs of the ward. And usually, I will say that the court finds out about this, and that conservator may be removed, punished financially. They may face some legal troubles themselves for doing that, and they need to put someone else in place that's trustworthy. So this is just vital, and it doesn't help when you have a vulnerable adult, right? So, for many baby boomers, losing the ability to make decisions about their finances can feel like a betrayal, right? Because it involves their home, their investments, their savings, their fear rather of financial mismanagement or even exploitation that I've talked about. And that's real in some circumstances. So the person in charge, the conservator, has the authority to make decisions that may not align with, the ward's preferences or things they had been doing previously. And that can cause stress as well. So as you can see, the consequences of losing these rights in a conservatorship can be significant and far-reaching, but it doesn't have to be that way. There are some steps you can take before a crisis happens to ensure that you retain as much control over your life as possible. Did you hear what I said? There are some steps you can take so that you can retain as much control over your life as possible. And there are ways to avoid the possibility of a conservatorship in your future. The key is taking action while you have capacity now, right now. And that takes proactive action. So we'll talk about that when I get back. Welcome back to Boomer Time, and this is Nancy Cogar, of course, and we are talking about the often inevitable results of a conservatorship. And we've already talked about some of the rights that may be stripped away as part of that action. There's some simple and proactive action you can take now that may just avoid a conservatorship in your future. And I really think that's worthwhile because anytime I've seen any of these conservatorship cases, there is always a high level of stress, even if everybody agrees. So what I would say is, taking steps now to have personalized, enforceable, comprehensive estate planning in place is really the best thing you can do. So creating a durable power of attorney would then allow someone that you designate and you trust to make decisions on your behalf in the event you become incapacitated or unable to make those decisions in the future. Happens all the time. And there are really strong guidelines in place about proving that you're incapacitated. This is not something that can easily just be done to take your rights away. Same thing with the court. The court has a burden of clear and convincing evidence in these conservatorships. All these documents, outside of, if you wanted to try to avoid that and have a estate planning in place, all of those documents have springing powers, we call them. That's what lawyers call them, so that you can have them be effective immediately, or you can have them spring into action if and when you become incapacitated. So even setting up a revocable trust can help you maintain control over your assets and avoid the need for court intervention. Establishing an advanced healthcare directive, that will ensure that your wishes are respected when it comes to your medical care, especially your end of life care. The earlier you put these plans in place, the more likely you are to avoid the need for court intervention, whether it's a conservatorship or something else. So, at the very least, you are ensuring that your rights and preferences are documented in documents that are enforceable, right? And can be honored with the person that you know is the person you want making these decisions appointed. So, the big question in all of this, can be how do I know or how do I decide that a conservatorship is really necessary? Well, these are hard circumstances, but oftentimes someone ends up in the hospital and, the hospital even makes a referral because they see this person's not able to make decisions. But oftentimes the central issue just really is the individual is endangering themselves or not able to make these decisions due to a mental decline, maybe, or even a physical incapacity. The other big issue that I already mentioned is whether that individual has any documents in place that are enforceable and that give a trusted loved one the authority to act on this person's behalf. And those documents are the result of estate planning. So I wanted to just give you an example of how a conservatorship might come into play. So I had a case a while back, and I've had cases like this before, but where a woman, she was widowed, living independently in her house, and somehow she had connected with a dating app. People are lonely, and I know you say you wouldn't do it, but people do it all the time. And unfortunately, there are a lot of scams in these types of things. And she connected with someone she thought loved her and was going to come here to Chattanooga to marry her and live with her happily ever after. So in order to do that, she was sending him money and money again and more money and again money until the money really started to add up. So much so that it got her daughter's attention. And her daughter was in another state. So she tried to intervene, but mom said, "You don't know what you're talking about. This guy is great. You're just trying to spoil my party." And so she said no. And like I said, if you're competent, you have the right to make bad decisions. Doesn't mean you have the right to be scammed, but I'm just using this as an example. So time went on, and the woman eventually spent so much money on her romance that she ended up losing her house. That's pretty painful. And at that point, there was a lot of evidence for a conservatorship. And the woman, obviously victimized, but then embarrassed and demeaned through that experience, then allowing their daughter to come in and be their conservator. So that involved a petition to the court, hearings, investigation, so forth, and eventually an appointment by the court of the daughter, who was then designed and designated rather with the responsibility of managing her mother's remaining assets. And at one point it made more sense for the daughter to bring her mother home to North Carolina where she lived. And I think this is important to mention too, because you can't just have a conservatorship in Tennessee and live in another state. So if that happens, please know that you would have to have that action transferred to that other state. That's what jurisdiction is. You hear that term and may not know what it means. So that's an important thing. So she went from a place where she knew where she was, she lost her house, and then ended up having to leave the state altogether. That was an instance where someone was finally able to come in and protect her, although there'd been a lot of damage done by that point, right? I know this is a lot of information to digest, and I don't want you to feel alone in this process. That's why, as I say all the time here, I want to offer you a personalized strategy session. We can sit down and we can talk about things you're concerned about, you're uncertain about, you have questions about. We'll figure it out together. And then I'll talk about options. So, if you're uncertain about your future or if you're trying to plan for an aging loved one, we can sit down and we can develop a customized estate plan. We'll discuss the ways to avoid those conservatorships, right? And the other challenges related to aging. I want you to have a quiet, comfortable, high quality of life as you age. This is the way to do it. And if you'd like to schedule a consultation, call my office or you can visit my website, nancycogar.com. I'll get those messages and we'll get you on the calendar. We'll sit down, we'll make sure your wishes are met, documented, and protected. But that's not all, okay? You know how I love resources. If you're looking for additional resources about learning more about conservatorships and ways to protect your autonomy or individual freedom, there's some places you can check out. And I'll put these links on my website, but just to go through them briefly, the National Guardianship Association, they offer a wealth of information on conservatorships, guardianships, which usually relate to children, and how to navigate the complexities of appointing a conservator. Right? We've traveled that ground. So I'll put the website up there. Also, the Tennessee Bar Association. I'm a member of the Bar Association, and their website has several resources for understanding conservatorships and what rights are involved. They can also list all kinds of attorneys in different parts of Tennessee that could help you with that. So I'll put that website up there too. And finally, the AARP. I know they've been around for a while, but they really have some excellent resources. And they've got a section on aging issues that includes conservatorships and ways to protect your rights as you age. So look for those. There's local aging and disability resource centers that offer free counseling and resources for both individuals and families going through the process and offer other forms of care. So there's one right here in Chattanooga, Southeast Development District, Area Agency on Aging and Disability. So I hope that this episode has given you some insight into the complex world of conservatorships and the important issue of protecting your rights as you age. So if you found this information helpful, please share it with someone else who might benefit. I find that the learning curve is really steep. So the more we spread this awareness and education, I think the better off we'll all be. And as always, I'm here for any questions that you might have. Just reach out to me. I love those questions. Sometimes I've made whole episodes on questions. Yours may be in a future episode. So, thanks for joining me today. And remember, it's never too early to start planning for the future. So take control of it. Protect your dignity and your autonomy as you age. You'll be glad you did. So until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep listening to Boomer Time, because that's our purpose here, to better educate and inform you about these issues that come up as you age. And I'll say it again, take action so your future is in good hands. So I'll see you next time here on Boomer Time.